second, my name is Dion Bates, and I'm with Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, and we're a regional service agency, and we're specialized in the special education regional technical assistance center. So we do a lot of technical assistance, and part of that work is really looking at how do we support students with disabilities, how do we really move the mark for that. And we found a need for a more focus on transition services, dual credit attainment. We just had some priority. Dr. Tatum going to explain all that, but then we made an effort then through that work to focus on post-secondary transition. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tatum and Jacob, who are at our office, and they've done some fantastic work to share.
Thanks for being here. And the superstar is Jacob to my left. So I'm going to make some brief introductory remarks about our study. And here's a little information about my background. I've served as a professor and administrator in higher ed from New York to New Mexico for 20 years. For 14 years, I've been in K-12 leadership. So I'm in the twilight of my career, but I'm still in good health, enjoying my work. And I have the privilege of leading our post-secondary education transition initiatives. They're project-based, teachers who are on fellowships working with me, building their capacity to work with their students, to motivate and encourage them toward post-secondary education, matriculation, and attainment. So we've had a lot of success, and we're at the end of a 5-year study. This is one of several projects, so it's time to share. So Jacob, if I can have the next slide. Yep, here we go. I'll just briefly introduce. We've been doing transition work for a number of years, I would say since the fall of 2017, very intentionally. So our 15 school districts that we work in under the Department of Special Ed umbrella have been immersed in all kinds of transition experiences. At the school in-person level, post-secondary education transition conferences region-wide, low-incidence transition conferences region-wide, those in-school in-person workshops, a lot of diversity there from guest speakers across workforce and education, as well as related services providers. So we're talking about a lot of experiences for these students. And what happened was, as we moved into the spring of 2021, Dr. Greta Hilton from the Office of Special Education and Early Learning at the department, our associate commissioner, reached out to us and said, hey, can you do a piece of work that really focuses on dual credit attainment? So we decided to pick 5 high-performing high schools that we had worked with, and those teachers that we knew would do the work if they committed to it. And we put them on fellowships, and we created a framework for them to work through this transition pilot project that has looked at the correlation between density of transition experiences, academic performance, dual credit attainment, and post-school outcomes. So the University of Kentucky is our data partner, and you'll see their little piece at the end. They're in Iceland, so they pre-recorded their little piece at the end, so that's kind of cool. But with that, I'm going to step aside because Jacob is our chief digital engineer at our cooperative, and he has been my partner through this study, and he's going to talk to you about the data and the results because we're showing some positive results. So we can take a little bit of credit for motivating our students through the capacity that we build with their teachers to help them become successful. So we're very proud of it, and I think you'll enjoy the statistics. Thank you so much.
So, hello. Sorry if I cough, because I'm getting over the plague. My wife started working at a daycare, and she immediately brought me the worst bug I've had in years. So, for the pilot project, we have like a roster of around 323 individual students, but that also includes this year we're moving into incorporating some middle school students as well. So, those 7th, 8th grade students won't be included in what we're talking about today. So just keep that in mind if you think our 178 student number seems a little low. So this data, we started collecting GPAs in 2023. So since we started, we've been surveying students, sort of gauging their knowledge on different things throughout. But in 2023, we actually started collecting GPA values to kind of see if there was an effect on their academics as well. And this shows a good progression through the 5 years that we've been doing the project. And if we just look through here, we were collecting GPA data in that first year. So this 7 number is just a happy accident. We just happened to get a few student GPAs from early on. And then 2023, we start to see a fuller number, so almost 70 students that year. And then in 2024, we added a 5th school, so there's a jump in the number of students. And then at that same time, we started seeing our first graduates, meaning later we can actually start looking at how they actually fared after graduation. So for transition, that's pretty exciting. And then we level off towards 25. Again, we see graduates and those incoming students replacing them, so we reach equilibrium. And 2026 is another odd year because it's still ongoing, so we don't have all their GPA data in yet. But what we do have is up to December of 2025. But I wanted to include that just to give a full scope of the span of the project. And another thing we can see from this table is the number of activities through the years. So on average, that first year they were getting just over 5 activities each. And that was when we had the lowest number of classes. But as we've expanded, it's kind of leveled off between 3 and 4 activities per student per year, which is nice when we're trying to connect that to any like occasional thing because they're all getting roughly the same amount of content. And when we look at GPA change, so in terms of, if we look at 2023, that'd be 2023 GPA minus their 2022 GPA. So the change over that year, and we would be compared to the number of activities that year, right? And what we see every year for all students within the pilot project, there is a positive trend in the GPA. Again, if you look at the individual student or sometimes even the school level, there might be a dip in that. But cumulatively, it comes out to a positive trend and makes us look good. This bottom line, that's the total number of students, so it's not the total here because the same students would be represented in multiple years, obviously. And then any averages I have are going to be weighted based on the number of students in the sample size. So just as a side note. To dig a little deeper into how the pilot may have been impacting the students, if we split them up based on the number of years they spent in the project, and keep in mind that's not linked to when they started because we're missing that first year of data collection for GPAs. So a lot of our like 24, 25 grads would fall within this 3 years group. And in fact, the 15 students that we do have 4 full years for, that's current year 12th graders that we had that December 25 GPA for. So just note that this isn't like a trend over time. This students based on the number of years that they were in the project. So what we see for each additional year, they get roughly 3 or 4 more activities. And their GPA change over time seems to be trending up. And I didn't want to gloss over the little dip we see for our 2-year group. So for a little extra context, I included the average starting GPA for those groups. And since GPA kind of caps out at 4.0, the higher they're starting out, the less room they actually have to grow. So that's one thing that could suppress the growth of that group because they have the highest compared to everyone else. At the same time, the 4-year group had the lowest. That paired with the smaller sample size, we get that explosive 0.86, which sure it looks really good, but I can't really believe it because the small sample size there. But to drill that on home, if we split the students based on where their starting GPA was, we do see that the students that were in that 1.0 to 2.0 range saw a much greater raw change in their GPA compared to the modest changes of those higher GPAs out there. So what this just tells us is the duration as well as where the students started out are like key contributors to how much growth they saw. But I'm trying to tell you that that growth is because of the pilot project, so we kind of need to compare that against something else. And thanks to okay, my stat friends, if we look at the same demographic for the state, and we take those high school GPA values and calculate GPA change the same way, so we take 1 year minus the previous year, we do see that the transition pilot project, that's what that TPP is, group did see consistent growth over time, but when we look at the state level, it kind of jumps around. So that's also a positive sign. And for the KVET group, that's the 15 districts we have. And keep in mind that we have a lot of smaller independent districts. And when you're working with special ed students, that there's a lot of stress data. So that's the average of what data was publicly available there. So when we compare that, it's looking pretty good. Thank you again. Now, if we had more time, I would throw a ton of our survey results to you, but one of the key questions is dual credit. So when we started asking students in 2023 if they're currently taking dual credit, 18% of them, so this is the pilot project students across all grades, said that they were participating in dual credit. And that increased to almost 23% of them in 2024, and it jumped again to 27% when we moved to 25. And since, as Will said, one of the key reasons the project was started was the concern of dual credit attainment. See, this line alone shows that we kind of succeeded. And then that result also could lead to our GPA changes as well. It's like a side effect. So if students are pursuing dual credit and other opportunities like that, they're more likely to be concentrating on their academics a little more. Sorry, I'm getting a little nasally.
And actually, this chart mirrors what you just heard from Dr. Ledford from CPE on his dual credit presentation, right? So, and that's great.
And just another feel-good stat for us, when we ask students if they're going to seek further education after they graduate. The vast majority of our pilot project students said, yeah, I'm planning to do that. But all this is based on students while they're at school. To actually know how things turn out for them, that's where our partners at the University of
Before
Kentucky.
you play this, just to reiterate, our hypothesis going into this, and I believe we've proven it, is that if students are exposed to transition experiences over the course of the year for a duration of time, we're going to be more motivated to think, plan, and prepare for their career pathway, their post-secondary education major, work harder academically so that they can meet those prerequisites. You know, as a university administrator and professor, I had buckets of tears cried in my office because students wanted to select a certain major, but they didn't do what they needed to do in high school. So I remember that from all those years ago. And so Dr. Dion Bates and I, when we brainstormed about how we would roll out this project, that was our thinking. So this is the last portion. We're doing good on time. Thank you. It looks like we'll have a little time for questions as well. So these are our partners. We'll just do a volume check.
Hello, this is Tony Lobianco from the Kentucky Post-School Outcomes Center, and I'm here with my colleague.
I'm Debbie Todd, also with the Kentucky Post-School Outcome Center.
And we're going to talk about our role in collaborating with KVEC on the Transition Pilot Project. So who we are, the Kentucky Post-School Outcome Center, we are data collection people, and we do reporting for KDE. They are our sponsor. We are a source for 1 year out data for students with IEPs. So if you've heard of the yo-yo, that is the Youth 1 Year Out Former Student Interview. We interview every student that exited high school with an IEP the previous year and find out what they're doing a year later in terms primarily of higher education and competitive employment, but also other things such as community participation, experiences with school, residence, guardianship, all kinds of different things. And we are also your potential partners, as we're going to highlight here today. We worked really well with Dr. Kayatin at KVEC, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
So, working with KVEC, we began as part of our KITSI group, which is the Kentucky Interagency Transition Cooperative. Across Kentucky, we've pulled together organizations, groups, surtechs that are interested in improving outcomes for students with disabilities at the transition age. And KVEC is a huge, huge member and partner with us on this. And that's where we first heard about our TPP.
And having known Dr. Kaizen, we began to meet regularly with him to talk about his project and how we might be involved. We offer this service to everybody, and we were really grateful that he was someone that took us up on our offer to help with them. So he was in the process of um, designing instruments to evaluate how the program was going as they were doing it. And we provided some consultation regarding better ways to look at those intermediate outcomes, really moving from a satisfaction-based tool to a knowledge and an action-based tool. And we determined that we were just a natural source for longer term outcomes. So they were going to collect stuff in the middle of the program. And then because we collect stuff a year later on everybody, we could just look at their group and find out what was going on a year after they exited high school and compare that to another group. So how did we go about undertaking this? Oh, you want to take this first one, Deb?
Sure. Part of our focus was understanding school improvement overall, right? School climate related to transition, and how do we improve that? Now, the reason we want to do that is because when we look at the school, it gives us so much more information than just looking teacher by teacher by teacher, because we know that the school is even more than the sum of the parts. It's more than just the teachers and the students. It's all the systems and the procedures and the policies that are part of it. And when we're looking at systems change, we need to look not just at individuals, but at the entire system. And for this project, the school made sense for our unit of analysis.
It did, and that doesn't mean that we couldn't use individuals for other projects if that were something that you all were interested in partnering with us for. But the schools just were the obvious unit of analysis for this project. And so we wanted to devise a control group as well. And we had a perfect one available to us because we were working with KVEC people. So, and not every high school in KVEC. So our control group simply became those high schools in the KVEC CERTAC that were not receiving the services that the TPP group was. And what did we find when we did this? So we're looking at higher education as an outcome because that's what TPP was focused on. And we see 4 years worth of data. We have a lot more than 4 years worth of data, but this was a natural starting point for us because their program kind of got going in 2022, and it's a good baseline year. And we can see the top line is the TPP schools, and they had 23.6% of their former students going on to higher education a year after leaving high school, which was better off than those in the control group, which were the other KVEC schools. So when Deb talked about the importance of picking good schools, that kind of demonstrates that at a baseline they were better to begin with. Then we see a little bit of what I'll call the honeymoon phase, where in 2023 um, it went up for the TPP schools. It did not do so for the non-TPP schools. But then in the third year, that's when, as so often happens with data, we go, wait a minute, why is that happening? This isn't what we expected. They converged. They became almost exactly the same as far as the percentage of students going on to higher ed. But then in the fourth year in 2025, which is the most recent year that we have data for, we saw a huge gain and a really big difference with the highest marks ever for students going on to higher education, 36% in the TPP schools and about 21% for the TPP schools. So what does that all mean? And I'm going to turn it back over to Deb for this.
So a lot of what we saw here actually plays out in a lot of the research around implementation and improvement science, right? Selection criteria is important. When you have schools that are already strong and who are willing to try new things, they're more likely to actually implement it with fidelity, right? And so what we saw in some of the data was just that. They were starting to grow, and then change takes time. It's not always going to be a smooth line. We often see change kind of go zoop and then go up and kind of plateau up, which is what we're starting to see now. And as we collect the 2026 data, we'll continue to monitor this and see if it does continue to do that path that we expect to see. What we don't know, though, are things like, does TPP definitely cause these changes, or are there other factors too? Education as a whole is hard to measure or develop correlations and causations because there's so many factors involved. There's the students, there's the teachers, there's the programs. And so while we can make some statements about where we're seeing correlation and what we think that correlation is, we can't necessarily say 100% that this causes this. The other thing we aren't sure about yet is which students specifically does this work for? And that's something we'd like to delve into more.
Very good points. And we know we don't have much time, and Dr. Kite and his team might have more to say. But there is our contact information, and feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to see what we can do or answer any questions. So thank you.
Just one thing I wanted to think about is, this work kind of evolved as we were learning, but this one is really an educational research study, right? We're just looking at, the real-time factors and what those things, what impacts that we can find a correlation between to improve outcomes. And so that's our whole focus with this work, was how do we improve those outcomes? And so it kind of just naturally matriculated into this research, this longitudinal study, because we wanted to continue to see, is the work that we are doing at our level impacting students and even post-school outcomes. And so that was the kind of the beauty of that, is that we were just informing practice. So it informs best practices at our schools, and we can share that with our high school teachers. But we are also building capacity for those teachers that are practitioners in that classroom as well, kind of all simultaneously. So I guess we can open it up for questions. If you have any questions.
I'm interested to know, in the handoff, the actual transition into post-secondary, were those campuses a part of any kind of network, or was there any follow-up support for those students as they transition? Because I work at CPE, we have one of the key populations is students with disabilities, and how to provide transition support, ensure they have the accommodations. Sometimes there's a difference in IEP and accommodations that a student had in high school or K-12 versus what they're eligible for as a post-secondary student. And so I'd love to see the persistence data, for your enrolled students as they continue on their journeys. But also, what can we do through partnership or what have you to better support students when they transition in and they have a known, or they have.
I need to come visit you.
Okay, and I'm not the strategy lead for that, but I would love to be a part of the conversation and invite you to
We're making some assumptions, and I don't like to do that the classroom teacher is working with disability services officer at the chosen institution, and they're making that transfer, giving those support, but I can't say that for certainty, so that's kind of where our project ends. But given that we would love to have some persistence data, let's come. I'll reach out to you, just send me a note. My cell number's on there, and I'll come up to Frankfurt, and we'll talk about how we can make that happen, because the key is to get the right people involved. That's why we've got Tony and Debbie from the UK, right? So This 5 years has informed our work. It's going to continue as a best practice because we've got another larger transition project that was originally funded by the ARP transition grant through the recovery. And so, yes, we will talk.
And I'd also love to know more about the actual intervention activities, those transition activities that your teachers were providing to students. That would be really great to know. We have also a Kentucky Advising Academy that is focused on college advising for high school students. And so, it would be really interesting to have a special focus on supporting students with disabilities in their transition from that high school coaching
We've got a
lens.
ton of stuff.
Okay.
And videographic representations of, I'll send you and you won't have time to look at it all.
I'll connect with the right people for sure.
Okay, please do, yeah. So does that sound like a plan?
Absolutely.
Moving forward, will I be welcomed at CPE? I was actually supposed to do a postdoc fellowship with your academic vice president about 20 years ago, and he accepted the presidency of the Illumina Foundation and didn't take me with him.
Oh, man.
I was working for more head state at the time. But thank you.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you say a little bit more about the kinds of IEPs students have that you've seen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the majority of them are specific learning
Okay.
disorders, meaning they're not benchmarking in one of the core academic content areas. You never know that they were under the special ed umbrella.
Right.
I also work with the low incidence MSD population, so they're part of this. They weren't part of this study as far as tracking them,
Okay.
but they will be moving forward. We're having those conversations.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and you saw the number 178 where we've served over 300 students. Welcome to my work life herding cats.
Yeah.
Right? So even though these teachers are on fellowships, that's still a challenge to get. I mean, we're really asking a lot, and this is, it's not easy herding cats, as it were, because I spend a lot of my time out coaching teachers, and trying to remind them about what I need for us to justify and support our work moving forward. So it's really challenging.
And these are, given that these are high school students, these are subject-specific teachers?
These are all special education
all
teachers.
special.
So even though they have a subject
Yeah.
area discipline
Yeah.
that's part of their degree, that's where they'll co-teach.
Yeah.
But typically, all of these teachers will have what's called a framed class where they get some extra time to do interventions with those students that are on their caseload.
Okay.
So that is usually when
Yeah.
those transition activities, whether it's a guest speaker or going on a trip,
Yeah.
or them hosting something themselves, because again, we have coached them to be transition teacher leaders. So instead of me or my colleagues being the ones to always provide those transition experiences, we've got all kinds of stuff going on that they're actually leading, and it's regularly being led in their classrooms. It's probably weekly.
Yeah.
There's time dedicated to transition.
Once the period of fellowship is over, is the goal, aim, hope that these practices can continue?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so this project, I'm sorry,
No, it's right.
this project is finishing the 5 years, but I've got even more teachers that are on fellowships doing even more transition work that was originally funded in the spring of 2023 by the American Rescue Plan. And so we absorbed that as part of our annual IDA proposal to the department, and it's been funded and supported, and so we're going to basically transition into that greater transition project moving forward. So it will continue, and it's going to be opened up for other teacher leaders to participate. So it's going to be open, it's going to continue, and we're going to have more teacher leaders, because that's really the key. It can't be isolated. It needs to be region-wide.